Today, really a text that I'm thinking of constantly is from John. The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. Do you have those times in your life when something goes right and you don't know why? Do you have those moments where you look around and you suddenly realize, I'm happy? I might be speaking as someone who has struggled with depression. And that, you need to know that. When I sometimes lie to my wife, she'll say, what are you smiling about? And I'll say, oh, nothing. And what I mean is, I was just looking down our driveway at the sun and the trees, and I realized God loves us all. And I feel like that's too much to tell her when we're just outside cutting wood to fix the deck. When you're out on the trail, what's going on? And I'll say, I love you, which is both true and not entirely true. Sometimes the truth is, right now I'm in love with the world. And I feel God in my life. And I feel close to tears. And you happen to be next to me. And so here we are. We get glimpses of God's joy in our life. And we don't, at least I don't seem to know often where it comes from, how long it's going to be here, where it's going. Jesus says that's the way it is with those who are born of the Spirit. Listen, we're making our way through Siddhartha, and many of us are already done. You could finish it this afternoon. We started talking about the call in our own lives, watching how God has led us places, brought us out of home. Watched for the call in Jesus' life and Siddhartha's life. How sometimes God calls us in surprising ways, different chapters of our lives, and we need to listen by paying attention to stories that aren't our own and looking at our own story at the same time for when the call happens. We talked about departure, because departures are difficult and there's grief involved in following God in a new way. Leaving behind sometimes what is unhealthy, what we're done with, to go on a new adventure. We talked about companions on the way, Jesus and his disciples and his inner core of disciples, his best friends that he knew better than the rest of the disciples apparently. And we too have shared stories about those who over the years, from childhood to even now, walk along with us, and how important it is to rely on them, to tell them what's going on, to share that journey, to try to speak the truth, even if it's surprising. And then last week, what I call desolation, Siddhartha's down points where he's thinking suicide, staring in the river, recognizing all his pursuits come to nothing, even gaining love, even gaining fame, even gaining financial security. So do maybe all of us sometimes or another in midlife look around and say, this is not my beautiful wife. This is not my beautiful home. My God, what have I done? Talking Heads, a rock song from a while back, because we know what's going on. Let me read to you today a little glimpse. First, let's go back actually to the New Testament text I want to follow up. A glimpse the disciples have of holiness. We're going back to, it's in your bulletin. There it is right there, Matthew 17, 1 through 13. Chuck read this wonderful story of walking on the water of Peter. Must have been one of the highlights of his life. Taking a chance and stepping out in faith. He must have talked about this forever. When later on, they gave him, you know what, for betraying Jesus, he must have also said, who else was out there on the water with me? Which of you other 11 had the guts to stand out? We have those moments in our life when we get a glimpse, maybe for a short while, what we're supposed to be doing, what God could be. Here's one of the best glimpses the disciples get. It's the story of the Transfiguration. You know this story very likely. I'm on page 18 of your Pew Bible. It goes like this. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. We were here just a few weeks back talking about companions and remarking that even at his Jesus' most glimpse of something special, he had his few companions right with him. He was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll take a selfie with my phone. And then I'll make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And while he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them. And from a cloud a voice said, "This is my son, the beloved, with him I'm well pleased. Listen to him." It's so great. Imagine hearing that. Imagine that affirmation of you guys are on the right path. Imagine this is it. Imagine God who only has 2 speaking parts in the Gospels, and they're the same part. One part at the baptism, one part here, the same lines. "Behold, this is my son, I'm pleased with him. Listen." Interesting. When the disciples heard this, they fell to their ground and were overcome by fear. That's fear and awe. So does sometimes when we get a glimpse of how great God is and how wonderful wife can be, we think, wow, overwhelmed. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up, do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about this vision until after the Son of Humanity has been raised from the dead." It's almost like Jesus doesn't want this glimpse to be the only reason they're believing. He doesn't want to just get good press, sensationalism. The disciples asked him, "Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" They're talking about the very end of all time. And Jesus replied, "Elijah is indeed coming and will restore all things," affirming the tradition. "But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but they did to him whatever they pleased." We suspect he's talking about his cousin John here, recognizing that John kind of played this type of Elijah come back, prophesying, here comes the end, and they did with him what they pleased. Now here's Jesus. So also the Son of Humanity is about to suffer at their hands. When the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. All right. I'm confused with the flow because I've lived an entire 2 weeks in the last 3 days that Julie and I have been down in California on a business trip trying to explore what our next steps might be with her salsa business. Not leaving here, but this of our eventual plan to take over the world with Colorado Black Diamond Salsa. And you know, do you have those days when we said this all the way home? Was that yesterday we were at the beach? Total confusion. There's so much packed into a day that I'm here thinking, what order was, I do this 2 weeks ago? Oh, no, this is Wednesday I put this together. Glimpses of what God might be doing. Let me read to you just a few snippets out of the Siddhartha story, out of the glimpses that Siddhartha gets after desolation, when Siddhartha gets, okay, maybe there is something to be found. Reading from page 92 first. This is a very adorable thing about companions. He's traveled, he's left home, he's left his best friend Govinda. It's been years, he's wandered, he's become wealthy, he's left all that wealth. He says this. And he falls asleep. And he tells the stranger, "Weariness overcame me." I'm at the top if you're following along. "And I kept my watch badly. Now you are awake, I must go overtake my brothers." Siddhartha says, "I thank you, Samana," common man, "for guiding my sleep. The followers are the illustrious one, that's you, are very kind, but now you may go on your way." He's been watching over Siddhartha because he slept in a dangerous place. Could be snakes next to the river, bandits, whatever. "I am going. May you keep well." "I thank you, Samana." Govinda bowed and said, "Goodbye." "Goodbye, Govinda," said Siddhartha, and the monk stood still. It's been years, decade. "Excuse me, sir, how do you know my name?" Thereupon Siddhartha laughed. "I know you, Govinda, from your father's house, and from the Brahmin school, and from the sacrifices, and from our sojourn with the Samanas, and from the hour in the grove at Jetvana when you swore allegiance to the illustrious one, the Buddha." "You are Siddhartha," Govinda cried. "Now I recognize you, and do not understand why I did not recognize you immediately. Greetings." It's a very sweet reunion of these two, both parallel and separate journeyers on where does life take us. 97. Siddhartha, in the middle, was aware of a great happiness mounting within him. Where does it come from? He asked himself. Sounds like he's reading from John. What is the reason for this feeling of happiness? Does it arise from my good long sleep, which has done me so much good, or from the word hOMe, which I pronounced? Or because I've run away, because my flight is accomplished, because I'm at last free again to stand like a child beneath the sky? Ah, how good this flight has been, this liberation. It's a profoundly existential book and Buddhist of living is what there is. We find our joy there. And lastly, to 105. The ferryman, Vasudeva, is talking to Siddhartha, he who wants to learn from him. You will learn, said Vasudeva, but not from me. The river has taught me to listen. You will learn from it too. The river knows everything. One can learn everything from it. You have already learned from the river that it is good to strive downwards, to sink, to seek the depths. He's been sharing his great struggles and failures and finding the absurdity in all things. The rich and distinguished Siddhartha will become a rower. Siddhartha, the learned Brahmin, will become a ferryman. You have also learned from this river. You will learn the other thing too. After a long pause, Siddhartha said, what other thing, Vasudeva? Vasudeva rose. It's grown late. Let us go to bed. I cannot tell you what the other thing is, my friend. You will find out. Perhaps you know already. Marty, what's the book? The guy who did the one-handed push-ups at the Oscars, who was telling Billy Crystal the one thing. Do you know what I'm talking about? City Slickers. Billy Crystal is on a spiritual quest, leaving Manhattan, doing this hilarious thing on the horses. This is 20 years ago. And who's the actor I'm thinking of? Jack Palance. I just suddenly realized this one is it. When he tells Billy Crystal, you got to find, there's only one thing you got to find. Billy Crystal says, what is it? And he says, that's what you have to figure out. I can't tell you that. No one can tell you that. Beautiful. All right. Is the journey into something or is escape from something? Is it into a deep self and truth, or is it trying to leave that behind? Kathy Brand, I'm going to put you on the spot. You wrote me a wonderful email a few weeks back about Siddhartha. I would have warned you this morning, but then that wouldn't have been as much fun for me right now. Could you just repeat some of your concerns just in a few sentences about this Siddhartha? Because it's right where we are.
Seems to me this is the story of a spoiled child who left home, discarded everything, lived as a samana until he found a woman. Then he hooked up and decided that he had to make money, all this kind of stuff, and he did. And then once he got older, and she got older, and you can throw in there whatever you want, he decides that this is all worthless, and he just abandons her.
Leaves again.
Leaves her pregnant, doesn't do anything to take care of her, and goes off again to find himself. So I think could be any man's story.
I know. Perfect. Thank you, Kathy. What a great sport. I had this slide up last week that said, is there something selfish about the spiritual quest? Forgetting that Kathy wasn't going to be here last week to give you that wonderful synopsis. So that's why I'm bringing it up now. Are we getting away from self? Are we utterly selfish, self-indulgent? Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Eat, Pray, Love. I'm looking forward to reading this next one. I liked Eat, Pray, Love, and some said, oh, what a entitled brat she is, so self-indulgent, and with her, and it's almost hard to argue with. You go, yes, except it's such a beautifully written book, and it portrays such a spiritual journey. I'm able to forgive this, where she also uses people and leaves them. Extraordinary. There is something selfish in the spiritual quest. I say this especially to my sisters, for whom typically the allegiance to family and giving of self to get dinner on the table is more common than for men who are taught from an early age, you need to leave home and go make something out of yourself. There's the difference. It happens early on, and yes, and we've got a couple distances here. One is a couple thousand years to a different culture, where women, of course, are not valued at all. The other is back to the 60s when Hesse was writing this book. And when it was famous, is there was even then, 50 years ago, a different sense of indulgence. It's impossible to argue with this piece of selfishness. We recognize it in ourselves. It goes hand in hand also with knowing when you have to do something other than be for others. That's nowhere near enough. That's a vacuous life. All right? When our kids leave and move out, and usually women more than the men stumble and say, who am I now? Who you are is someone who's on a spiritual journey. And unless you get a little selfish about your life, you're never going to find yourself. Unless you get willing to leave some people behind, to do some departing, some grief. Unless you are willing to be accused of being selfish, guess what? You're only ever going to be making potluck food for other people and doing what they want you to do. It is a hard journey. Marty, you got the second one. Does Siddhartha even listen? He has so many teachers around him. You said a great thing last week or 2 weeks ago to me about this. Do you know what it was?